with growth hormone release to avoid drinking caffeine in alone a treatment for severe depression. I wouldn't want anyone to consider caffeine a treatment for severe depression, or at least not alone a treatment for severe depression, but provided the anxiety-inducing effects of caffeine can be kept in check through use of theanine or making sure that the dosage and the timing of caffeine ingestion is correct, then caffeine overall seems to be good for our mood and prevent depression, or at least keep depression at bay when depression might otherwise surface or be more severe. And of course, there are the don'ts surrounding caffeine intake as it relates to sleep. And to put it very simply, sleep, that is getting enough quality sleep each night, is the foundation. It is the bedrock of mental health, physical health, and performance. Sleep and the power of sleep far exceeds any nootropic you could ever take, any prescription drug you could ever take, any health promoting tool for your immune system, your metabolism, your mental function, your physical function you could ever take. Sleep is the bedrock. I know a lot of people experience challenge with sleep. Nobody is perfect about sleep. That's important to keep in mind. I think a good goal is to get enough quality sleep of sufficient duration, 80% of the nights of your life, and then as much as possible to make sure that the remaining 20% of nights you're not getting enough sleep for good reasons as opposed to hard reasons. Good reasons would include raising children. That's important. After all, every species desires to make more of itself and to preserve and extend the well-being of its young. So child rearing is a perfectly legitimate reason to get lack of sleep, but you really want to strive to get quality sleep most nights of your life, which means that even if you're somebody who can quote unquote drink an espresso and then fall right asleep, that you avoid caffeine intake in the 12 hours prior to sleep. I realize not everyone will be able to do that. And in fact, I sometimes violate that. So I tend to go to sleep around 10 p.m. every night, sometimes 11, occasionally 12 midnight, but usually around 10 p.m. every night. I confess that my last ingestion of caffeine is not always 10 a.m. or prior to that. So sometimes I will have caffeine up until 11 a.m. or maybe noon. And very, very rarely I'll have an afternoon coffee or espresso or non-calorie containing soda or tea or something that's of that sort. But I really try to restrict my caffeine intake to the early part of my day, that is before noon, given that I go to sleep around 10 p.m. each night. And I strongly encourage everyone out there to try and limit their afternoon caffeine intake. This is something that Dr. Matt Walker, who's an expert sleep researcher out of University of California, Berkeley, psychology and neuroscience department there, author of the incredible book, Why We Sleep. He's been on this podcast, many other podcasts, talking about the importance of sleep. He will remind us, and I'll remind you now, that the quarter life of caffeine is 12 hours. I mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to repeat it again. And that means that if you ingest caffeine at noon, 25% of its effects, more or less, okay, I'm using a broad stroke here to talk about quarter life, 25% of that is still going to be bioactive at midnight that night, which will disrupt the early phase of your night, the amount of slow wave sleep, which then in turn will disrupt the amount of rapid eye movement sleep, which will disrupt your emotional processing during the following day, and so on and so forth. Okay, none of this is to say that if you have the occasional cup of coffee in the afternoon, that's going to completely demolish your sleep-wake cycle forever. But I really encourage people to avoid drinking caffeine in the 12 hours prior to sleep. And if you can't do that, within the 10 hours prior to sleep. And if you can't do that, within the 8 hours prior to sleep. So really try and limit your caffeine intake in the 8 to 12 hours prior to going to sleep at night. And of course, slow wave sleep, aka deep sleep, is the sleep that's associated with somewhat mundane dreams, which makes it sound like it might not be that important, but it's also the sleep that's associated with growth hormone release, which is important for protein synthesis, repair of all bodily tissues, and metabolism. And slow wave sleep is also critically attached to your immune system's ability to clear out bacteria and viruses that might otherwise infect your tissues. Now I'd like to talk about caffeine and performance, and that includes both mental performance and physical performance.